If you really deeply understand the product that you're building, you're not only going to not make those mistakes, but you're going to build much better products.
Hi, welcome to the Product Experience. I'm Randy Silver. You don't have a career like Shannon Scott's without learning a few things along the way. Now the global head of product at fintech Airwallex, he also spent 11 years at Palantir. Shannon joined me to chat about finding the right job, hiring, and building enterprise products. Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us this week. How are you doing?
Alrighty, yeah, I'm great. Thanks. Great to be here. Looking forward to chatting today.
And one of the great things about this is we get to do this with people from all over the world, and we are, I think, literally pod and antipode on this one. So can you just give us a little bit of an introduction? Where are you today? What are you doing these days? And how did you get into product in the first place?
Yeah, great. So I'm Shannon. I'm based in Melbourne. It's 38 degrees Celsius today, so I'm sweating in my own apartment, but looking forward to getting to this. What am I doing? Well, I'm leading the product organization at Airwallex. Airwallex is a private, about $5.6 billion company, now in its 10th year, and we help businesses operate globally by providing financial services that transcend borders and software that drives efficiency in financial operations. So really making it easier for those financial teams to manage their finances. This is actually my first formal role in product, or at least having a product manager title after starting Airwallex 5 years ago. Historically, I studied computer science, and if we scroll back to 2005 when I graduated, the tech bubble had burst, the iPhone wasn't released, most people didn't know about Facebook. It was just not a sexy time for startups. Tech wasn't sexy. I think the options for me as a software engineer or an engineer generally was like I can go and work for like a traditional vehicle company like Ford or General Motors, or I could work for an oil and gas company. And all the really smart students at school, the engineers that I looked up to and did really well, they were being sort of like sucked up or vying for consulting companies, tier one consulting or whatever that may be. So business was sexy, tech wasn't. But I was very lucky to join a 7-person startup that pitched itself as a consultancy, but actually was building software to help insurance companies optimize their pricing and portfolio. And it was super complex software, which meant I had to like work really closely with the customers to make sure, hey, using the right data, do you understand how to train the models? Do you understand how to set the prices? And this really was a combination of consulting and working closely with the customer, and then software development. This turned out to be, I think, the sort of perfect intersection. Maybe I'll add communication skills as well, but probably the perfect intersection for product management. And scrolling forward, I worked with Palantir Technologies for 11 years. Again, they had very sophisticated enterprise software that they were deploying into large organizations. And so really working closely with the customer and really driving to making sure you had the right success outcomes for those customers was really important. And I think that led me into the product role now here at Airwallex.
I love this. One of my favorite things to tell people is you don't have to have the title of product manager to be using those skills and to effectively be doing that job. You can look around companies, 99% of good product management is just good management, period. But doing it in a way that combines technology and business and everything else is, that role can exist in many different parts of a company.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the product managers who have a really strong depth of understanding in a particular domain, whether you've been a software engineer for 3 to 4 years or whether you've been in sales and you've had to like really hustle to close a customer and know what it's like if you don't quite have the right product or you haven't quite met their needs.
So what made you say after all this, you joined, you helped start Airwallex a while back. What made you say product was the right fit for you after all this time?
Actually, that was probably their title. Airwallex was probably a little bit larger by the time I joined compared to my sort of graduate role, compared to starting at Palantir. They had strategy roles and product roles available and actually asked me which one I'd like to be part of. To me, the building side, like really actually sort of executing and delivering on product was more important. But the role and title actually wasn't important to me anyway. I think making sure you're actually working with a company that you believe is actually going to be successful and actually scale over the time that you're there is the more important thing. I think it was just important to get involved.
So how did you know this was the right thing for you? We're talking about some of the lessons you've learned over the course of your career, and finding the right role and the right company seems to be something that's come up a few times for you and you've had some experience with. But how did you know this was the right company and the right role? What informs that kind of decision for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's something a lot of people potentially sort of steer away from and maybe don't take a leap into sort of startups or scale ups because they're not sure. But I think the first thing to keep in mind is actually like it is a reversible decision. Obviously, it's a very important one, but I think people should go into these startups or environments knowing that, hey, it may not work out. The worst case scenario is actually you stay there for many, many years and it didn't work. I think you need to pay attention once you're on the inside as well. Is this a company that I believe I can grow? But otherwise, you can pivot. And I've had employee experiences, which I didn't mention, which maybe lasted 3 to 6 months. And then I've had the long tenure experiences like Palantir and Airwallex. But I think you're probably going to want to find a company that's already established product market fit. I think prior to that point, it's really difficult to determine if the actual idea can actually be realized and grow into a really successful company. There's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of, I think, promotional aspects of and maybe excitement about an idea, but it's not really until you actually get that traction that you can prove a company's going to be successful. So for many employees, I probably suggest that, just having achieved product market fit is probably the right time to be getting on board. And at this point, the company is really starting to scale and start to think about, hey, how do we actually build out our engineering team, build out our sales team, build out marketing, or whatever we need to do to sort of scale that initial indications of fit. And I think that's a really exciting time to be part of like all of those different things happening at once. Obviously, at Airwallex, we're a little bit further along now. We're in our 10th year. But my job is also thinking about how can I create sort of pockets of, startups and sort of entrepreneurial activity inside Airwallex that allows those teams to operate like a startup and grow. So I think even though Airwallex is a bit further along, I think we still have a lot of really exciting sort of growth opportunities as well over the next 5 years.
You said something about interesting there about joining a company at the right time, and obviously the stage they're at, whether what round of funding they're at, whether they've hit product market fit and are growing. There's certain things about financials and things like that that you can evaluate from the outside. What else do you do when you're looking to join a company? How do you evaluate a firm from outside and evaluate that specific opportunity as well?
I mean, you have to believe in the product that you're going to be building and selling as well. I think, you want to be enthusiastic about this product. You want to, you'll have your own confidence that this product is actually going to be a successful one. Certainly at Palantir, it was like very early when I joined, and they were working into a very difficult space. Like actually penetrating large enterprise in government is something that most startups would have stayed away from because it was actually just too difficult to break into that market. But what I saw in that team was actually like very high confidence, very capable people who were going to stop at nothing to achieve that goal. And I think it's the same at Airwallex. When I looked at the leadership team and some of the broader employees that we had there was a real drive, a real sort of hunger and intensity where they wanted to create a great product. They wanted to sort of take it to the next level. And what's impressed me at Airwallex over the past 5 years is, they established product market fit with their FX and transfers product several years ago, but they kept sort of looking for the next opportunity. They kept looking at, okay, now can we develop a card issuing product? Now can we develop the checkout experience? Now can we introduce this sort of business process software? And so that hunger, I think, comes from your people and their motivation to be part of this and really grow. So looking at the people is really important too.
Lots of people talk a good game, and interviewing is a really interesting experience because it's like going on a first date, maybe a second if you're lucky, and then deciding to get married straight away. And as you said, it is a reversible decision, but you're basing this on a couple of encounters where people are putting their best foot forward. So what do you do to go dig a little deeper and say, these are people I really want to connect with and spend a lot of time with over the next few years?
Well, I mean, if it really was a date, it'd be a very uncomfortable one, right? Because actually, you both go out there for dinner, but one person is just like peppering the other with questions, and the other typically gets sort of an opportunity to respond, or maybe sort of
Fair.
10 minutes at the end. It's a pretty intense process. So I think firstly, let's focus on getting you across the line and presenting like your best foot forward. But then I think the tables can turn, right? If the company says, hey, we're really interested. I think one thing that stood out for me at Airwallex is I could tell that the team really understood the value that I could bring to the business. And while actually the role was not particularly well defined, I think some of the skills that I'd had in the way that sort of Palantir had grown, I think were going to be very relevant to Airwallex. I think the way we think about hiring people was very relevant. So I could see that there was a strong connection between what I could offer and what Airwallex was looking for. And then if you have questions, it's your turn to actually set some time aside to interview the company, maybe go on that date, maybe go out for a coffee, meet some of the staff, speak to the people who've interviewed you, or maybe ask to meet the people you've worked with, because it is actually a two-sided relationship. And so it's really important to get it right.
And in terms of looking for roles, especially earlier in your career where you're growing, are you looking for something where, or are you advising people to look for things where it's something that they already know how to do, where they have, 95 to 100% of the capabilities. It's in a field that they're already a subject matter expert or familiar with? Or are you advising people, or are you looking for places that are new to you and going to give you a challenge that you're not 100% sure you can do?
I think there's probably two aspects to this. The first aspect is your sort of education and your experiences. And what I want to see in that case, or what you should be thinking about is, did you really like nail the education that you did have, right? Did you actually like overachieve? Did you actually go into that industry and perform really well? I think that demonstrates that you have the skills to be able to apply what you're good at and actually demonstrate that you can do those things. But when it comes to the new company, you may be doing something totally different. So for example, I had the software engineering background, but I had no experience in the finance industry when I joined Airwallex. I think what the team could see in me was that actually it was like, hey, this guy's worked in a number of different industries before. He seems to have excelled in those roles, and therefore we trust that he can sort of pick this up very quickly when he joins Airwallex, which has that sort of financial experience. Now, I think why that's the right decision when we look at any candidate is because what Airwallex is today is not necessarily what it's going to be in 5 years from now. Or your role could actually evolve. Maybe you're a very strong individual contributor and you've been doing some great software development and great product management. If you accelerate with the business quickly, you may find yourself in a leadership position very quickly as well. And maybe you haven't had experience in that area. But I need people who can actually evolve, learn quickly, understand those new environments, and thrive in that world of ambiguity. So that probably means they're pretty critically minded, pretty intelligent and creative thinkers who can actually take on those new experiences really readily.
Let's look at it from the other side, from the hiring side, because I've seen this from both sides at times. There are companies who want to hire people who have specific experience in the field, and then there are companies who say, you know what, we're all here. We have lots of experience in the field. We want to be challenged. We want to be stretched. We want this dynamic person who's going to bring a different perspective to it. What do you look for when you're hiring? Or is it situational? Sometimes you need an SME and sometimes you're looking to expand the team.
Yeah, look, I think it's about the balance. Like, there's a lot of different ways to bring diversity into the team. Like those with the software engineering background, those with a commercial background, those who've done a lot of sort of delivery work in the past. Sometimes even like marketing folks can be really great at growth thinking in product. So it comes from a variety of backgrounds, and there's a lot of diversity there, even before we talk about the particular industry or function of the product that you're building. Most of the time, I'm like, there's going to be some cases where you're going to need somebody who really has a good experience of that domain, and therefore you're going to hit the ground running. But one thing you need to be careful of too is how it worked in their previous employer might be nothing like how it works at your current employer or this new environment. And so sometimes if you come in with these preconceived notions that like, hey, I'm the expert, they're hiring me for expertise, I'm going to come in and show them how it's done. Very often that creates a really jarring experience with the sort of culture or the peripheral ways things are done in that new company. So even if you have the experience, I still need those folks to be really open-minded about learning from both sides. And hey, in a year from now, I might need you to do something else, or you'll be extended into an area that you're not familiar with. That's certain to happen if the company is growing successfully. So even with that experience, I still need those critical thinkers who can evolve with the business and can be capable of and want to actually take on those new things.
Shannon, so what else are you looking for when you're interviewing someone, when you're putting together an interview process? How do you find people that you think are going to be ready for this? What does a good process look like for you?
Yeah, so if we go back early in someone's career, I think one of the greatest sort of metrics of capability is really their education. I mean, this is an environment where people are graded against the common system for like how much effort they put in and their academic results. I do think, as a student, it's really important to apply yourself and show yourself in the best light there, because I want those people who really did demonstrate they were going to like learn the material, they were going to put the effort in and actually generate the results. So one thing is that sort of like demonstrated academic achievement. From there, though, I also want people who really want to be behind this company, right? I think, with startups that are actually also, issuing equity to their employees, I think it's a really well-aligned incentive model for employees who actually want this business to be successful. They want to grow with the business. They want to see it have the right outcome. And there's plenty of great candidates who really want to see, especially in product, the impact of their work. Hey, I really want to sort of build something that I can see delivered. I want to see customers who are actually using it. I want to get the feedback and make it better and better. And that really means getting behind the company and focusing on how they can be part of a bigger system. So I love people. I think, especially we hire all around the world. Obviously, I'm here in Melbourne. We have a large team in Singapore. We have folks in Europe and in the US. But I think there's a lot we can learn from sort of that American spirit and in Silicon Valley, where they're really there to be part of the next big thing, and they want to be part of it. So I want to see those sort of motivations in the way candidates demonstrate themselves as well.
And how are you digging into this? Did you give people a task, or do you do scenarios with them? What's the way that you dig further than just asking standard interview questions?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think I would love to do more tasks and case studies that are offline, but one of the challenges is I think people have different availabilities. Maybe you've actually finished working, and so you have all the time in the world to prepare for the next interview. Maybe you're not actually looking for a role, and I'm trying to convince you to join me, and you're very busy, and I'm giving you a case study. So I tend to find they're a little bit too circumstantial for the actual candidate. I think I trust people when they are actually talking about their motivations and their background and the why behind why they've sort of like done the studies that they've done, why they went and took a certain career, why they pivoted from software engineering into product, or why they did a certain role. And I think talking about the why behind your career is far more important than, or a very important part in addition to the what. And then on the sort of critical thinking intelligence side, we do ask some pretty challenging questions. And I think the point there is to look, what I'm really looking for is people who want to understand how their environment works. I think like just about every person in most of the developed world now has a smartphone. There's some people who really are looking at that phone thinking, hey, this is actually a really amazing product. Like, how can it actually like so easily determine where I am? How can it how can the apps be installed so readily? How does it actually like evolve so quickly? Why did a new Apple upgrade change things the way it did? I want people who are really sort of thinking about these sort of real world systems and how they operate. And so discussing questions that maybe is a real world system or a hypothetical product that we can build, and then sparring on what that might look like, I think is a pretty good way to understand someone's critical thinking. I always want to make sure those questions extend people, as far as I can. So sometimes the questions can sort of escalate in difficulty, so we can really get a sense of how capable people are.
And is that something you're doing one-to-one, or do you want a couple of people from your team in the room on that?
No, we do
What's
it.
the right number of people?
Yeah, we do it one to one. I think typically, like, it's great to be shadowed if we've got new interviewers. I did some shadowing today for an interview. But I think it is important to also have a template of sort of what you're looking for and the different areas of the interview that you're assessing on. I think if you have multiple people, let's say two interviewers, one person asks a question, the next person will chime in, that the clock will run down, and you haven't necessarily achieved either interviewer's goal. So we tend to do it one to one. I encourage each interviewer to have their own sort of style, but make sure they can do it in a way that's consistent enough for them to have a good baseline of what good looks like and what candidates might not be suitable.
All right, let's switch topic one more time. You talked a little bit earlier about some of your work at Palantir and other places and going into enterprise. And when we talked earlier, you told me you'd learned some really interesting things from your experience in trying to build enterprise products, some good things, some bad things along the way. Give us a little bit of an understanding. What were the big things that you learned in this space? It is a very challenging space, and people who haven't been in it are sometimes really surprised by some of the complexity there.
Yeah, I think like my career has very much been on the enterprise side and certainly on the consumer side, which is probably the other side of the spectrum. I have like much less data on, but if I look at consumer, and you're operating at scale, you might have thousands up to hundreds of millions of customers, and then you're operating in a very different way in terms of how you get feedback from those users or customers as to how you iterate the product and how you test. I think with enterprise, especially when you're getting started, you might only have one or two customers. You might have everything pegged on just the success of one or two customers. And it's really difficult to actually understand, hey, am I building something that is actually going to scale beyond these customers, or am I just sort of caught in the trap of like building whatever they are asking me for? And at Palantir, I think this was a particularly interesting challenge because the problem was so complex. Palantir had a very capable data analytics platform, but they had to actually introduce the data of the customer and then try and make sure our software could support the workflows that they were actually using. And that meant we were very often doing a lot of customizations with a lot of question marks on, hey, is this something that is going to scale? Is this something that we can repeat for many customers? How can we actually modify the code base to support this? I think we did everything we could. For example, your data connectors, you make them sort of agnostic to the system you're connecting to. The customizations, you try and make them quite isolated from the core product so you can sort of turn them on or off like plugins. But ultimately, I constantly found myself, building things that weren't reused, or we might have built the same thing or very similar things 3 times for different customers in different industries around the world. At the time, that was incredibly frustrating, and I thought that that was actually sort of a mistake in the way that we were delivering the product. As I look back, though, I think there's really like two key things. The first is we actually learned a ton by working with those customers on learning what did and didn't work, and it's very difficult to get that right first time off. So if you do have to build something 3 times, you're actually going to be very, very good at delivering a generalized, refined version of it in future. And I think Palantir most certainly got there over the years as we collected more and more of these enterprise customer examples, and then we customized for specific industries.
So, Sean, when you're building something 3 times, I mean, obviously you're potentially accruing tech debt along the way. You've got multiple systems out there that you need to support. Are you migrating the old systems onto the new one? Are you, as you go, are you rebuilding and rebuilding, or are you just, do you have multiple things out there that you then need to deal with?
I think long term, like again, for enterprise, we tried to create a common core, and I think everybody, like every engineer will try and do this, create this sort of common core and then customize per customer. But even so, you may find some of those customizations you are needing to maintain sort of against your will for a given customer, and you may have to sort of keep doing that. With consumer, you probably just turn it off, right, and just force everybody across to the new system. But with enterprise, I think it's still really important to keep that customer, and so yeah, you generally were actually maintaining a lot of those like bespoke features. Again, if you can try and isolate them, that would be really good. And then over time, I think you obviously want to try and wind them back. The reason why it was really important to actually maintain these services is actually in enterprise, your reference customers are so important. The success of the customers that you have and their testament to other customers, the potential customers in the future, is the ultimate marketing tool to be able to keep expanding. It is a very complex environment. Your customers expect it to be complex. They know they're not necessarily easy to work with if you're working with their systems, if you're working with their existing employee processes. So they really appreciate you going to those extra levels and making sure you're delivering something successful. And so for Palantir, the referenceability of those customers to get to the next customer, which was generally much bigger. So the tech problems were sort of like much more significant in retrospect if you look back to those sort of decisions that you made in the past. And for Airwallex too, we have both sort of the smaller business customers and the large enterprise customers. And I think it's really important to have a team that gets behind those enterprise customers to compound on the brand that you have to expand from there.
Product people, are you ready? The word on the street is true. MTPCon London is back in 2025. We're very excited for Mind the Product's return to the Barbican next March.
Whenever I hear people talking about the best product conferences, Mind the Product is always top of the list. If you've been before, you know what's in store. Oh, that rhymes. New insights, strategies, hands-on learnings from the absolute best in the field, plus great networking opportunities. And if you're joining us for the first time, I promise you won't be disappointed.
We've got a great lineup this year. We're welcoming back Emily Tate, ex-Mind the Product MD turned CPO, Jose Quesada, VP of Product at Amex, Leah Tarrin, Product-Led Growth Advisor, and Aby Atawidi, Director of Product at YouTube.
Real people working in the field who will share real, actionable insights to level up your game as a product manager.
There's also some guest speakers from UK product tanks. Special shout out to Rebecca Mortimer, who's in my product team at BBC Maestro.
Whether you're coming to the Barbican in person on March 10th and 11th or tuning in digitally, join us and get inspired at MTPCon London. Tickets are on sale now. Check out mindtheproduct.com/MTPCon to find out more. Or just click on events at the top of the page.
So looking at it from this perspective, you've got multiple versions of a system out there. You've got the hottest and latest one that you'd really like everyone to migrate to, but you've got a couple of older versions, the first tries, that are custom. I'm guessing you're making the decision on when to retire those based on a combination of, is this a reference customer? Are they important enough? Are they profitable enough that we're still generating profit, even maintaining a team just to keep them going? Or are there, besides the referenceability, are there other things that you're looking at as well?
Well, I think also like the relationship with your customer is really important too, right? Because this isn't just about like, hey, here's my product, like take it or leave it. If you have a product that you're maintaining that is at cost to you that you cannot be profitable, or that you cannot maintain, and perhaps you can't bring over the new features that the customer would love to have, then they're also going to sort of recognize that this isn't a good sort of mutual, contractual agreement. Like ideally, you call these like enterprise customers a partner of yours. You're both incentivized to have a great solution. And so I think just talking it through with the customer about like, hey, this is not a service that we can actually support, or we found that other customers need something different. We can, I don't want to abandon the customer. I think it's very rare that that's the case, or in that case, they're going to know that it's the wrong product fit anyway. So often it is like having a close relationship with the customer can actually like allow you to come to an agreement about how you can migrate to the right solution. Actually, Palantir took this several steps further. I think, at a time when many services were being deployed to the cloud, which is how Airwallex operates, Palantir was working with government contractors and intelligence agencies who are disconnected from the cloud for various purposes. And so not only did we have different versions, we actually had different versions that we couldn't readily connect to. And so the team came up with a versioning system that allowed them to bring a floppy disk or whatever it took onto a sort of existing customer's site and very quickly know, okay, for these modules, these are the versions, these are the sort of upgrade paths that you can take. And so it was a very sophisticated versioning system to be able to account for the different customer needs and then the sort of offline, online nature of some of your customers.
A lot of times when you're working in enterprise space, one of the really important things is, what we think is one of the really important things is the ability to predict where the market is going. Because you're building potentially really complicated things, and doing trend analysis and trying to get into the magic quadrants can be really important. And people think this is magic sometimes in and of itself, being able to divine where things are going. Is it more important to know where things are going, or to be able to respond quickly and pivot?
I think we just spent a few minutes talking about sort of the cost of building things that actually you don't want to scale into the future, right? And actually, I think that's sort of the first sign that maybe what you're building actually is probably not in the right direction. Or you have to really think critically about what is the element of this that can be scaled, what is the element of it that is unique to that given customer. I do think that continuing to talk to your customers and really understand what they're looking for is paramount. Obviously, the industry is moving very quickly, but I think there's just so much low-hanging fruit in how a lot of these large enterprises are operating in order to actually improve their experience. Like there's so much sort of manual handling of data. Like I still feel like Microsoft Excel is still, the greatest developer platform of all time. And that's because there's so much software that doesn't solve for a given customer's needs that they revert back to spreadsheets. And so, even though there's a world of AI coming, which is going to sort of modernize everything and automate everything for you, I think understanding the customer's real problems today and sort of the processes that you're using is incredibly important. And it doesn't take many examples, I think, to actually see a pattern there and understand what you need to build. I think that the valuable thing for Airwallex is that we have both the direct side of our business and then the platform side of our business. And so all of the infrastructure that we're building, all of the sort of payout rails, the cards, we are utilizing that infrastructure for our customers. So we see what those end users are needing, and then we're making that same infrastructure available via our API for platforms to be able to access that infrastructure. So we know there's a use case for this infrastructure. We know there's hundreds of things that we would like to build on top of it but don't have time to. And so I'm actually really excited to learn about what different customers are doing with our infrastructure in terms of embedding financial services for their customers. So I'm very confident we have a fit here. The questions for me are, how can I make it easier for those platforms to actually utilize our software? Can I improve the APIs? In the financial industry, licensing and compliance is incredibly important. Risk is incredibly important. If I need to push a lot of those requirements onto the platform, our customer to sort of figure out what to do there or make sure they're being compliant, that's a lot of overhead for them to actually think about how to utilize our technology and how to build their own services. If I can build product that can take that complexity away from them, handle it for them, and maybe, for example, I'll produce an embedded component that can sort of sit within their software and can easily onboard their customers and meet all the compliance regulation, then I've built a product that is actually easier to adopt. And then we're going to get more and more customers on our platform. So I can see a pretty clear path. I don't think you necessarily need to be able to predict the future. You just need to understand your customers more.
That makes sense. And I do remember hearing something, I can't remember where I heard it years ago, that the best way to have a successful startup was to look at what companies are using Excel for and try and turn that into a SaaS product.
I think it's harder than it sounds, actually. Everyone's got appropriate experience, but there's a lot of opportunity to improve.
I think we've got time for one last question, Shannon. I wanted to ask you about this is not a simple question by any stretch of the imagination, though. I want to ask you, what have you learned about making mistakes over the years? People are going to make mistakes. What do you learn from them? How do you deal with them?
I talked about, earlier about, joining startups, right? Joining a product market fit. And one of the key reasons for that is that company is still figuring it out, right? Yes, they've started to establish product market fit, but where they go from now, the next 3 years and beyond, they're hopefully going to grow 10x or more. Maybe they're going to, grow multiples of that every year, which is wonderful. And they're going to be learning by doing, right? Like they've never done it before. They haven't written the sort of employee handbook yet, or at least not necessarily how to build what you're building. They don't have all of the different employees to sort of tell you what to do. And so you're really actually sort of thrown in the deep end in terms of what you need to do, what you need to learn, where we go from here. So then when I think about, the mistakes themselves, like inevitably you're going to make a lot of errors. What was interesting about working at Airwallex and in the financial space is some of those errors would cost us a lot of money, right? Like it wouldn't just be the actual product, the customer not really liking it or giving you feedback. I think in one case we were rolling out our card issuing product. So these are corporate cards. People might not know, but you'd see it when you look at your bank statement. You make a purchase with your card and it sort of says pending. And then a couple of days later, it sort of is a completed transaction. That's because it's actually like a two-step process. And the first step is basically saying, hey, does the customer have the funds on the card? And, are they authorized for this transaction? The second step is just finalizing the amount. And so very early on, we had some bugs that, for example, maybe just something went wrong in the background and it sort of would decline the transaction, which is very annoying for the customer. They're trying to buy something and it declined. So that certainly wasn't a good thing. But we didn't lose any money because the transaction didn't go through. What we didn't realize at the time was only the first part of the transaction, that first check, decides will this transaction go through or not. And that sort of second capture step actually is really just a formality, but the scheme, like Visa, for example, is taking the money whether we like it or not. So if we threw an error, on that second leg of the transaction, we actually canceled the transaction and we didn't deduct our customer's wallet, but Visa still took our money, still deducted from sort of Airwallex's account. And that was a very costly bug, right? Because ultimately then the money went to the merchant, the money wasn't deducted from the customer, and we racked up quite a lot of losses because of that incorrect understanding. Now, that's my fault. I didn't understand sort of the intricacies of, the card ecosystem at the time. I think it was a learning experience that I needed to go really deep. I need to really understand what's happening. I need to look at and be able to reconcile the funds in and the funds out. But ultimately, it was a really wonderful learning experience on sort of how card schemes work and what to document and what checks to do. So we all learned this together. Fortunately, we learned it when we were doing a lot less volume than what we're doing today. But those things will happen. And I think really make you think about, hey, do I actually understand the system I'm building? Can I actually verify I'm building the right system? And how can I build on top of it?
It's an interesting story, but you're talking about this, you're taking responsibility for it. I'm sure there were other people involved in making some of these decisions. But at a certain point, either you're noticing this or someone is coming to you and saying, hey, what's up with all these losses? So how did you, I mean, that's in some companies, that's a fireable offense. That's no one's going to trust you again. You're still there. How did you overcome that? How did you communicate it and get past it as a company?
Well, yeah, I think it was the finance team who sort of brought to our attention that the numbers weren't quite adding up, and it actually took them quite a long time to tell us. So the losses were racking up. I think, at the end of the day, where the intent is correct, right? Like Airwallex, we're building a lot of really important products. We're working as hard as we can to get those products out to customers. There will be errors along the way, but I think, the most important thing the employee can do is go as deep as possible and really understanding the system. Like if you're not actually, as a manager, and even I was a manager in this context at the time, it's not an excuse for me to just trust my team and be like, hey, looks like you've got it. Looks like this is all working. Great job. Here's your sort of performance feedback at the end of this, every 6 months. I'm responsible for understanding how the system is operating as well. I want to be a captain on the field playing with my team. I don't want to be a coach from the sidelines, just giving advice. So if you really deeply understand the product that you're building, you're not only going to not make those mistakes, but you're going to build much better products. This actually goes back a long time, but I think one of the most impressive app store apps that was built on the iPhone very early on was a camera product that allowed you to take rapid photos, 10 photos a second. I know that's easy to do now, but it wasn't easy to do 15 years ago. And it was faster than Apple's own camera. And Apple ended up buying out this app and sort of employing the guy who built it. And the question is like, how did this developer create a camera app that was faster than Apple's own camera? And the reason why he could do this is he actually really understood the compression format in which the file is actually stored, the codecs he used to transfer it into media, the way that the camera actually sort of translates the shot into the pixels. And he engineered every part of the layer all the way down. Now, most apps, most developers will just say, hey, there's a camera and I can use the feed that's coming out of it. But this developer actually went all the way to the bottom of the stack, from how the image is actually encoded on the hard drive up to the shot itself. And if you understand that, you can build much better products than those who are just operating at the surface layer. And so even though Airwallex is working in a very complex space in the financial industry, there's so much happening with compliance, with the risk, with the transaction and the ledgering, which is the piece that we got wrong at the time. Having that depth of understanding is a tremendous sort of bonus and knowledge bonus we had to build on top of that. And hey, we learned from that experience and move forward.
So Shannon, I love that story about the app developer, because one of my favorite questions to ask people when I'm teaching people that product is to hold up my phone and say, how many products is this? Because, to me as a consumer, it's one product plus a lot of apps and software that go on there. But there's, obviously the screen is a product, the camera is a product, the chipset is a product, from it's all different perspectives. And so often we're divided up among teams. Our specialties, we look at our product, but not the whole ecosystem that sits in. And if you really understand the entire system, yeah, there's a lot you can do with it.
I think great product managers really do have that inquisition to understand, like, how does this all come together? What are the foundations that I'm building on that has enabled this? And technology evolves so quickly, it's easy to sort of make a lot of assumptions about how things work, but the deeper you go, the better the outcome.
So you obviously went through this experience, you guys lost some money, and you came out stronger for it. And you talked about being a captain on the field and working with your team, but what kind of things do you do if someone comes to you now and says, boss, something's not gone quite right? How do you deal with it? How do you then react and say, well, how are we going to learn from this and make sure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I think that's the why, right? That's the why. It's like, how did we get into this situation? I really want to ask the question, like, yeah, what happened? Who did this? Who was involved? And people are obviously very uncomfortable or sheepish about sharing that information. But I think firstly, unpacking, how a mistake happens really means that you can understand the mistake. And if you're not intellectually honest about that, then the mistake can recur. And so making a mistake once is absolutely fine. Hopefully it's not too catastrophic. But repeating that mistake probably is grounds for further investigation as to how that employee is operating. From understanding what the mistake was, then you have the ability to think about how can we prevent this in future? Like, what rails can we put in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Like, maybe we've upset a customer, maybe there's a reconciliation issue, maybe there's a logging issue or a test case that would have caught this sooner. So by understanding the problem, we can put the rails in place to make sure it happens again. In our case, in this sort of card example, the ledger really was the tool that enabled us to make sure nothing was going wrong. And so if we have a strong ledger and are making sure everything's balancing at the end of the month, or if we're making sure everything balances at the end of the day or the hour, then we can reduce the space for error. And so you keep building up that tooling. I think Facebook did this too, right? They wanted to move fast and break things. That was their motto. And then they're like, oh, actually, we need to move fast and break things with stable infrastructure, right? Because then you can actually correct for those mistakes and put the rails in place to make sure nothing too catastrophic happens.
And how do you create an environment where people feel comfortable admitting this? Because lots of times people want to hide it. They feel ashamed. They're afraid of what might happen. But obviously, you're trying to encourage an environment where people come to you quickly and honestly.
Look, I think this is really hard, and to be honest, I don't think I'm creating a really soft and fuzzy space where it's like, hey, don't worry, you can come and talk to me, everything's fine. Actually, I think this is a pretty intense place to work. But what I do know is all of the employees have best intentions at heart, right? Like, we're all here to deliver the right product. We're all here to remove those mistakes, to create a great experience. And so if you can create an environment where we're all on the same team about getting something actually delivered, then people, they know it's not the right thing to not share an issue. They want to be able to proactively raise the issue, nominate the solution, explain the reasoning, and then we can move forward. So I think the environment I want to create is just people who are all on the same team about where we move forward.
Yeah, I think there's something to what you were saying earlier. You've made mistakes. You're admitted to the mistakes. That doesn't make it a soft environment necessarily, but people know that mistakes can be made. People can overcome them, and there is a right way of going around and dealing with it rather than trying to hide it or expecting to be coddled because a mistake was made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at Airwallex, we're a very, I think, direct organization, but we're all in it, to try and come up with the best outcome. And I think everyone can get behind that.
Shannon, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us today.
Well, thanks, Randy. It was great to chat. I really appreciate the opportunity.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer, and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.